Imagine walking home after a normal day, hands in your pockets, earbuds in, your favorite song playing, when suddenly there's a presence behind you. Not just anyone, a police officer. And he's not here to protect, he's here to accuse. It was early evening in Shillington, Pennsylvania, a quiet borough of just over 5,000 residents, known for its tree-lined streets and small-town charm. The street lamps along Windsor Avenue glowed softly as Marcus, 17 years old, an honor roll student, standout athlete, and devoted son, walked home after helping his mother close the register at the local grocery store, only a short distance away. A seasoned police officer with a controversial reputation stood watching. He had already decided Marcus was guilty of a crime that hadn't even happened the way he claimed. What would follow was not just a mistake, it was a lie capable of destroying lives, fueled by prejudice and the unchecked power of a badge. But what the officer didn't know was that a camera was watching everything. Before the story unfolds, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and stay until the end, because the truth you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Marcus was only 3 blocks from home when he first noticed it, the faint but deliberate echo of footsteps behind him. At first, it blended into the quiet rhythm of Shillington's evening. The small Pennsylvania borough was usually still by this hour. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass from earlier in the day, and the only real sounds were the distant hum of a car engine somewhere far down Lancaster Avenue, and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a soft breeze. But these footsteps, they were different. Heavy, firm. They carried an intention. Marcus slowed his pace, just slightly, and the footsteps slowed too. He turned his head ever so slightly, trying not to be obvious. That's when he saw him. A man in dark navy, a police uniform. The streetlight caught the edge of a silver badge pinned to his chest, just long enough for Marcus to read Officer Blake. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that seemed to fill the street. His eyes, narrow and unblinking, were fixed on Marcus. A knot formed in Marcus's stomach. He'd never had trouble with the police before. He was the kid teachers trusted to lock up the gym after basketball practice, the one who spent weekends helping his mom stack cans at the store. Still, something in Officer Blake's gaze told him this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Stop right there," the officer commanded, his voice sharp and low, carrying an authority that didn't invite questions. Marcus stopped. The bag in his right hand, just bread and milk, felt suddenly heavy. He turned to face the officer fully. "Is something wrong, sir?" His tone was polite, almost cautious, but there was a tremor beneath it. Blake closed the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. His boots struck the pavement in a rhythm that made Marcus's heart race. When he stopped, they were only a few feet apart, close enough for Marcus to see the faint scar running from the corner of Blake's left eye down to his cheek. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," Blake said flatly, as if reading from a script. Marcus blinked, confused. "A suspect? In what?" Blake's eyes didn't waver. "Vandalism. Happened about 20 minutes ago near the park." Marcus almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the idea was absurd. "I was at the grocery store with my mom until just now. You can ask her, ask the cashier." The officer's voice cut him off, louder this time. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus's chest tightened. His fingers flexed around the plastic grocery bag. He raised both hands slowly, the bag swinging slightly from his wrist. His mind was a storm, flashes of news stories, videos he'd seen online, faces of people who looked like him and didn't walk away from encounters like this. "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said, his voice trembling now. Blake took a step closer, his shadow swallowing Marcus's smaller frame. "That's not for you to decide." The street felt different now. The soft glow of the street lamps seemed harsher. The houses, neatly lined with trimmed lawns, felt like silent witnesses, their darkened windows holding people who might be watching. But would they speak up? A car passed by slowly, the driver glancing at the scene before quickly looking away. Marcus noticed it. So did Blake. The officer's tone shifted slightly, but it wasn't softer, it was colder. "We've had complaints. A black male, late teens, dark hoodie, jeans, Fits you perfectly. You think I can just ignore that? Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to shout, to demand proof, but he could feel the weight of the badge, the gun at the officer's hip, the unspoken threat hanging in the space between them. I'm just trying to get home, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Blake tilted his head, studying him like an animal sizing up prey. Home can wait. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The night air felt thick, almost suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound sharpened the stillness. Finally, Blake's hand moved, not to his weapon, but to the radio clip to his vest. He pressed the button. This is Blake. I've got a possible match on the Windsor Avenue incident. Detaining now. The word detaining hit Marcus like a physical blow. His stomach sank, and he could feel heat rising in his face, a mix of fear and outrage. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was something else, something darker. Blake gestured toward the curb. Sit down. Marcus hesitated, and Blake's eyes hardened. Now, Marcus lowered himself onto the curb, the cold concrete seeping through his jeans. His grocery bag sat beside him, the bread slightly squashed. He stared at the ground, trying to steady his breathing, but his mind was racing. Every second felt like a trap tightening. The sound of the radio crackling broke the silence. A voice came through, muffled but clear enough for Marcus to hear the words. No clear ID on suspect yet. Still reviewing. Blake glanced at Marcus, his expression unreadable. We'll wait, he said. And in that moment, Marcus realized this wasn't about finding the truth. This was about control. Marcus sat on the cold curb, his knees bent, hands resting on his thighs. The grocery bag beside him like a small reminder of how ordinary this night was supposed to be. The street around him was still quiet, but it no longer felt like the same Shillington he had known his whole life. Now it felt hostile, almost foreign, as if every shadow hid a threat. Officer Blake stood over him, legs planted firmly apart, the yellow glow from the nearest street lamp cutting across his uniform and highlighting the edge of his holster. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared, as if letting the silence do the work. Then, without warning, he stepped closer. Empty your pockets. Marcus blinked. What? Don't play dumb, Blake said. Empty them. Now, Marcus slowly reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, pulling out his phone and a crumpled receipt from the grocery store. He set them on the curb in front of him. That's all I have. Other side. Marcus complied, pulling out a small keyring with his house key and the key to his mother's store. They clinked against the pavement. Blake's gaze swept over the items with disinterest. Where's the spray paint? Marcus's head snapped up. Spray paint? You think I haven't heard it before? Blake interrupted. A store near the park was vandalized less than half an hour ago. Windows tagged, obscene words on the walls. Witness saw someone run. Young black male, late teens, wearing exactly what you're wearing. And here you are. Marcus's mouth went dry. I've never even been near that store tonight. I was with my mom the whole time. Save it. Blake cut in, his voice dripping with skepticism. You're telling me it's just a coincidence you fit the description perfectly. It's not a description, Marcus said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. It's just an excuse. Blake's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might have pushed too far. The officer crouched down so they were eye level. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and something bitter. You know what your problem is, Blake said quietly, almost conversationally. You think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can walk around doing whatever you want because no one's watching. But I'm watching. Marcus felt a flash of heat in his chest, anger, fear, humiliation all tangled together. He wanted to tell Blake that he had nothing to hide, that he'd lived 17 years in this town without a single mark on his name, that his teachers would vouch for him, his neighbors, anyone who actually knew him. But he also knew that right now none of that mattered. Blake stood again, towering over him. Get up, Marcus hesitated. Am I under arrest? You're being detained, Blake said. For questioning. On what grounds? On the grounds that I said so. The words landed like a slap. This wasn't about justice. It wasn't about evidence. It was about power, the kind that didn't need proof, only a uniform and a badge. Blake reached for Marcus's wrist, pulling him to his feet with a grip that was unnecessarily tight. The officer's hand moved toward his belt, and for a split second Marcus thought he was going for the handcuffs. Instead, Blake pulled out a small notepad. Name, Marcus Reed. Age, 17. Blake scribbled something down. Address. Marcus gave it, each word feeling like another piece of himself being taken. Blake closed the notepad and slipped it back into his pocket. We're going for a walk. Marcus swallowed hard. Where? The park, Blake said. You're going to show me exactly where you were. Marcus knew instantly what this was, a setup. The officer wanted to put him near the scene, to make it look like he'd been there all along. I'm not going anywhere without my mom, Marcus said firmly. Blake stepped in close, his shadow merging with Marcus's. That's not how this works. The tension between them was thick, the kind that made the air feel heavy. In the distance, Marcus could see movement, a figure standing in the doorway of a house across the street, watching. But the moment their eyes met, the curtain shifted and the figure disappeared. Blake's hand twitched toward his radio again. Dispatch, bringing suspect in for further questioning. The word suspect hung in the air like a verdict. Marcus felt something deep inside him shift. He realized that no matter how polite he was, no matter how calm, the officer had already decided the ending to this story. And unless something, or someone, changed it, that ending wouldn't be in his favor. The walk began with the officer's hand hovering inches from Marcus's elbow, close enough to guide, far enough to look lawful. They moved along Windsor Avenue toward the small park that sat behind the library, the quiet heart of Shillington after dark. Porch lights clicked on as they passed. Curtains shifted. People saw, and then pretended not to. Marcus kept his pace steady, eyes forward, trying to count his breaths. In for 4, out for 4. The bag with bread and milk had been left behind on the curb, a little monument to the life he'd been living 5 minutes earlier. He wanted to turn back for it, if only to prove he still had a choice in anything. But Blake's presence swallowed up the street like a storm cloud. They reached the corner where a brick duplex hugged the sidewalk. A chime sounded as the screen door cracked open and an older woman peered out. Her hair was silver and tied back with a thin scarf. Marcus recognized her Mrs. Delgado, who always waved when he biked past, who once slipped him a second popsicle on a blistering July afternoon, and told him to keep it a secret. Her eyes flicked from Marcus to the officer. Is everything all right? She asked, voice tight. Blake didn't bother looking at her. Police matter, ma'am. Please go inside, Mrs. Delgado hesitated. Her gaze lingered on Marcus, picking up a question in his expression that he could not safely ask. She started to step farther onto the porch. Blake turned his head then, not fully, just enough for her to see the challenge in his eyes. It was a small movement, but heavy with warning. The porch light washed her face pale. Slowly, she eased the door shut. The chime sounded again soft, apologetic. Silence settled like dust. The only sound was the dull tap of Blake's boots and the softer scrape of Marcus's sneakers on the pavement. They passed a row of parked cars. In one, a dashboard screen glowed blue. A man sat behind the wheel, phone raised at chest level, camera lens tilted in their direction. He looked like he wanted to appear invisible. His hand trembled. When Blake glanced at him, the phone disappeared so fast it might never have been there. They turned onto a broad street, where the library's brick facade rose like a dark ship against the sky. The park behind it was a patch of grass with 2 benches, a swing set, and a low concrete wall that always smelled faintly of moss. Tonight, it was empty. The swings didn't move. The benches were cold. Right there, Blake said, pointing at the wall. That's where the scanning starts. Marcus stopped. Scanning what? Your route, Blake said, as though explaining something obvious. You're going to retrace it. I told you I came from the store. I didn't cut through the park. Blake's answer was a stare held 1 beat too long. Start walking. Marcus stepped off the path, shoes crunching over a scatter of fallen twigs. The grass glistened with a thin film of dew, dampening the hems of his jeans. He could see the back of the library where a security camera was mounted under the eaves near the service door. He swallowed. Cameras meant truth, but they also meant time for someone to decide whether to check them, time for the wrong person to make the call. As he moved, A voice whispered across the lawn. "Hey!" It came from the side of the library, near the bike rack. A teenage girl leaned there, hugging a backpack to her chest. She wore a beanie and an oversized hoodie with the school's emblem. Her eyes held Marcus's for a fraction of a second. He knew her from the hallway's Kayla, to grades below him. She took a breath like someone about to jump into cold water. Blake pivoted. Parks closed. Kayla flinched but didn't leave. Her voice was small, but it had edges. He wasn't here. Blake's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. Pressure, density. "You see something tonight." His tone was deceptively smooth. Kayla's fingers tightened around the backpack straps. She looked at Marcus again. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He kept his face neutral the way his mother had taught him to at the first sign of danger. But his eyes asked a question he couldn't speak. "Are you sure?" Kayla opened her mouth, closed it. The sound of another door creaking open drifted over from a nearby house. Someone else was watching now, another shadow at another window. The parts of town that woke up at the first hint of trouble had begun to stir. Blake took a step toward her. "If you saw something, you'll come with us and make a statement. If not, you're loitering." Kayla's courage faltered in the old, familiar way of kids who learn early how power behaves. She shook her head quickly. I didn't see anything." She slipped past the bike rack, eyes dropping to the ground, and hurried away along the sidewalk, shoulders collapsing under the weight of her retreat. Blake watched her go and gave a soft snort that might have been a laugh. People love to talk until responsibility shows up. Marcus clenched his teeth. Or until intimidation does. Blake's gaze cut back to him. The officer's face was calm, almost bored. "Keep walking." They reached the bench nearest the swings. A candy wrapper fluttered at its base like a small flag. The park's lamp buzzed overhead, casting a cone of light that made everything look washed out. Marcus's breath clouded faintly in the cooling air. He felt too visible here, too isolated on display, and yet unseen. From across the street, a figure in a bright jacket stepped out of the shadows. Mr. Patel, who ran the corner deli. He raised a hand, half a wave, half a test of how much space he had. "Officer," he called, voice steady but cautious. "Is there a problem with the boy?" Blake didn't turn. "Go back inside." "Sir." Mr. Patel didn't move. "He is my customer every week. Good boy. Polite." "I can vouch. That's enough," Blake said, louder now. "Interfering with an investigation will not go well for you." The street swallowed the rest. Mer. Patel's raised hand hovered, lowered, hovered again. Then he stepped back, the jacket's brightness shrinking, until the dark took him in. The deli's door chimed, then went quiet. Marcus had imagined this moment so many times in other people's stories, a crowd forming, cameras out, voices rising with the simple, stubborn insistence of witnesses. But Shillington was not a city. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's mortgage payment and whose cousin got a DUI 3 years ago. It was a place where the badge had dinner at your restaurant and coached your kid's baseball team. Silence wasn't passive here, it was survival. Blake gestured at the swing set. "Your path." Marcus stared at the rubber seat, tilted at an angle like a mouth letting out a long sigh. He'd never been near the swings tonight. He wanted to say it again, to scream it. Instead, he pointed a line that went nowhere, from the bench to the path, from the path to the trash can, from the trash can toward the library's back entrance where the camera watched with its unblinking eye. Blake followed his gestures, reading the air as if it were evidence. "We'll confirm," he said. "How?" Marcus asked, aware his voice betrayed the hope he couldn't suppress. "With the camera." Blake's eyes cut up to the eaves, then back to Marcus. "Maybe." "You said vandalism," Marcus pressed, hearing the thin edge of desperation. "The store near the park, there must be cameras there too. You can check the time." "You can. I know what I can do," Blake said, softening his tone the way someone smooths a tablecloth over a stain. "What you can do is stop trying to run the investigation." The word "run" lodged in Marcus's throat. He forced air past it. "I'm trying to tell the truth." Blake glanced at his watch, then at the quiet houses, weighing something. Truth has a way of sorting itself out. He shifted his stance, and the radio on his vest crackled. A voice filtered through dispatch, thin and remote, asking about status. Blake pressed the button. Still detaining. No confirmation yet. He let the button go, considered Marcus a beat longer, then added flatly, "No cooperating witnesses." A lie simple enough to repeat. Marcus felt it land like a stone. A motion at the edge of the park pulled his gaze to boys on bikes, middle schoolers he'd seen at the gym, hovering at the corner where Brobst met Beverly. Phones out. One boy lifted his chin as if to suggest solidarity. The other tugged at his sleeve, their wheels already angling away. They drifted off, the moment collapsing behind them like a wave that almost crested and then thought better of it. This was the weight of silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of fear. It filled lungs and rooms and decisions. It bent spines and closed doors. It told good people that good intentions were not worth bad consequences. And it pressed down on Marcus until he felt smaller than his own shadow. Blake exhaled, decision made. "We're done here," he said, as if the park had yielded nothing but his own authority. "You're coming with me." Marcus's stomach dropped. "To the station, for questioning," Blake said, "and to wait for confirmation." He paused, then added with a hint of satisfaction, "Unless you'd prefer cuffs." "No," Marcus said, throat dry. "I'll walk." They left the park, the lamp buzzing above them like a tired insect. Behind the library, the camera kept watch, recording its soft, indifferent truth. Across the street, a curtain shifted. A porch light went out. The town inhaled, held its breath, and chose not to exhale. The station wasn't far, but Blake made the walk feel like a march. He stayed half a step ahead of Marcus, forcing him to match the pace. Every few blocks, the officer glanced back over his shoulder, not as if checking for danger, but to make sure his authority was still intact. The night in Shillington had deepened. The storefronts along Lancaster Avenue were dark now, their display windows reflecting the streetlights in pale, ghostly shapes. A single bus rumbled by, half empty, its passengers looking out at the sidewalk. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, reading the scene for themselves. 17 years old, walking with a cop, no jacket, hands visible. The image wrote its own story before anyone heard the truth. When they reached the station, Blake didn't guide Marcus to the front entrance where the public came to pay parking tickets or request records. Instead, he led him to a narrow side door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution, with a hint of something metallic beneath. The hallway was lined with doors, most closed. A few left ajar, revealing glimpses of desks piled with paperwork and bulletin boards covered in flyers. Blake didn't slow until they reached a small, stark room at the end. "Inside," he said. Marcus stepped in. The room was barely bigger than his bedroom closet, four walls painted an uninspired beige, a table with 2 chairs, and a single camera in the corner pointed directly at the center. A buzzing fluorescent light overhead cast an unflattering glare across everything. Blake stayed standing, blocking the door. "Empty your pockets again." Marcus complied, placing his phone, keys, and the receipt from the store on the table. Blake's eyes scanned the items with a faint sneer. "Sit." The chair was cold, the metal legs squeaking against the floor as Marcus settled in. Blake remained standing, arms crossed like a warden inspecting an inmate. "You want to tell me why you were near the park tonight?" "I wasn't near the park," Marcus said. "I came from the store." "You can check the cameras there." Blake raised a hand to cut him off. "We'll get to that. For now, I'm asking you." Marcus forced himself to meet Blake's eyes. "I told you the truth." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "You know how many times I've heard that?" "Maybe you've heard it because people are telling the truth," Marcus said quietly. For a moment, Blake just stared. Then, with a small exhale that wasn't quite a laugh, he walked around the table and stood behind Marcus's chair. The officer's shadow stretched across the table, long and sharp. "You think this is about the truth?" Blake asked, his voice low. "This is about order. And right now, you're out of order." Marcus felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He kept his gaze on the table, focusing on the tiny scratches in the laminate. The door opened suddenly, and another officer stepped in, a younger man, clean-shaven, with the kind of polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Need me to run the footage from the park cameras?" he asked. Blake didn't look at him, not yet. The younger officer hesitated. "It might help clear this up. I said not yet, Blake snapped, his tone slicing the air. The younger officer glanced at Marcus, then back at Blake. All right. He closed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the small room. Marcus's chest tightened. The proof existed. It was just a matter of someone deciding to see it. Blake moved back to the front of the table, leaning forward until his hands were flat on the surface. Here's the thing, Marcus. People who cooperate tend to have shorter nights. People who don't, well, things get complicated. I've cooperated, Marcus said. I've answered every question you've asked. I've told you where I was, who I was with, and yet your story still has gaps, Blake interrupted. It doesn't have gaps, Marcus shot back, his voice louder now. It has the truth. You just don't like it. The air between them crackled. Blake straightened, the muscle in his jaw twitching. Careful. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't another officer, it was a civilian. A woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled into a low bun, wearing a cardigan and carrying a clipboard. She stepped in without knocking. Marcus Reed, she asked, glancing at him over the rims of her glasses. Yes, Marcus said, uncertain. I'm a youth advocate. State law says if a minor is being questioned without a parent present, someone like me has to be here. Blake's shoulders stiffened. We were just talking or interrogating, the woman asked. Blake didn't answer. Marcus's first flicker of relief all night sparked in his chest. Maybe now, someone would make sure the truth came out. But as Blake stepped back and leaned against the wall, his eyes never left Marcus. And in them, Marcus saw something chilling. This wasn't over. Not even close. The woman set her clipboard down on the table with a deliberate thud, her eyes locking on Marcus with a steady, reassuring focus. She took the chair opposite him, the one Blake had avoided. My name is Linda Hart, she said. I'm here to make sure your rights are respected. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, still unsure how much power she really had in a room like this. Linda glanced toward Blake. Has his parent been contacted? Not yet, Blake said, his voice clipped. Then we're doing that now, Linda replied without looking away from Marcus. She slid the clipboard toward herself and began scribbling notes. Marcus, you have the right to remain silent until a parent or guardian is here. If you choose to speak, I'll be here the entire time. Blake let out a quiet breath, almost a scoff. We were just trying to clear this up quickly. Linda looked up at him. Quick doesn't mean right, officer. The air thickened between them. Blake's jaw worked like he was chewing something unpleasant. Marcus felt his first real flicker of safety since the night began, though it was fragile. He sat a little straighter. The store has cameras, he said quickly, before the moment slipped away. The one near the park and the grocery store where I was. You can see I wasn't anywhere near. We'll get to that, Blake interrupted, his tone smooth but edged. Linda turned her pen toward him like it was a weapon. You have video evidence available and you haven't reviewed it. Blake's eyes flicked toward the corner camera in the room, then back to her. We have procedures. Procedures that include detaining a minor without notifying his parent. His silence was its own answer. The door cracked open again, and the younger officer from before stepped inside. Hey, I pulled the footage from the park camera. You might want to see this. Blake didn't move. Leave it on my desk. Linda's voice cut in sharply. No. Play it here. Now, the younger officer hesitated, glancing between Blake and Linda. It's important. Marcus's pulse picked up. He could almost feel the truth inching closer. Blake finally pushed off the wall, slow and reluctant. Fine. Let's see it. The younger officer set a laptop on the table, the screen glowing pale blue. He tapped a few keys, and the grainy video came up timestamped, black and white, showing the empty park path at the time of the vandalism call. They watched. A lone figure entered the frame, but it wasn't Marcus. The person was shorter, stockier, wearing a beanie and a jacket Marcus had never seen before. They sprayed the wall quickly, then jogged out of view in the opposite direction of where Marcus had been walking. Silence filled the room. Marcus leaned back, relief and anger crashing together in his chest. That's not me. Linda looked at Blake. Well, Blake didn't answer right away. He reached for the laptop, tapped the trackpad, and rewound the footage as if searching for a flaw. Cameras can be misleading, he muttered. They can also be the truth, Linda shot back. Marcus wanted to believe this was the turning point, but the way Blake's eyes lingered on him, unreadable and unyielding, told him the fight wasn't over just because the evidence was clear. Because in this room, truth didn't seem to be the deciding factor, power did. Blake didn't close the laptop. He let the still frame sit there, the grainy image of someone entirely unlike Marcus, frozen mid-spray while he paced the narrow room. His boots thudded softly against the tile, the sound measured and deliberate. Linda folded her arms. "What exactly are you looking for, officer?" "Because the only thing this footage proves is that Marcus was telling the truth." Blake stopped pacing and looked at her with a faint smirk. "Or it proves he had an accomplice." Marcus's head jerked up. "What?" "No, it's possible," Blake continued smoothly, ignoring Marcus, "that he sent someone else to do the tagging while he kept watch from another location. Maybe even to create an alibi." "That's ridiculous," Linda said. "And speculative. You don't get to invent a crime because the real evidence doesn't fit your theory." Blake turned his gaze on Marcus. "Tell me again where you were at exactly 8:43 p.m. in the grocery store," Marcus said, his voice tight. "With my mom. Any chance you stepped outside for a moment?" "No," Marcus said firmly. Blake leaned forward, resting both hands on the table, his eyes boring into Marcus. "If you're lying, son, you're only making this worse for yourself." Marcus held his stare. "I'm not lying," Linda cut in before Blake could respond. "You have access to the grocery store's security footage, correct?" "Eventually," Blake said. "Now," Linda pressed, "if you're serious about the truth, we check it now." The younger officer, still lingering by the door, shifted uncomfortably. "It's easy to pull. They've got digital backups. I can call the manager." Blake's jaw tightened. "Fine, do it." As the younger officer stepped out to make the call, Blake straightened and crossed his arms. "You should know, Marcus, video or no video, there are other charges we can explore: trespassing, disorderly conduct, loitering after hours in a public park." Marcus stared at him, disbelief spreading like cold water down his spine. "You just can't admit you were wrong." Blake's eyes hardened. "I enforce the law, and sometimes that means digging until the whole truth comes out." Linda scoffed. "Or until you find something, anything you can twist into an offense." Blake didn't rise to the bait. He went back to pacing, his shadow crossing over Marcus again and again, like a pendulum. The door opened, and the younger officer returned, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Got the grocery store footage." Manager emailed the clip. "Shows Marcus at the register with his mom from 8:40 to 8:46. Receipts match." Blake froze mid-step. For a moment, the room was completely still except for the faint hum of the fluorescent light. Linda leaned forward. "That's the pieces of video evidence clearing him." "Are we done here?" Blake slowly turned to Marcus. "You're free to go." Marcus didn't move right away. Part of him wanted to stand and walk out without a word. Another part wanted to say something, anything that would force Blake to acknowledge what he'd done. But the officer's expression made it clear. Leaving was the safest choice. Linda gathered her notes and stood. "Come on, Marcus." As they left the small room, Marcus could feel Blake's eyes on his back, sharp and unyielding. This wasn't over. Not for him, and maybe not for Blake either. Marcus stepped out of the side door of the station into the cool night air. The street outside was nearly empty, but it felt different now, like he'd just crossed an invisible line between two versions of his life. Linda walked beside him, her presence steady but brisk, as if she knew they needed to get clear of the building before Blake changed his mind. Halfway down the block, Marcus spotted two familiar faces leaning against a parked car. Jalen and Rico, friends from the basketball team, straightened when they saw him. Jalen pulled out his phone. "You good, man?" Jalen asked. Marcus nodded once, but his expression told the rest of the story. Rico tapped his phone screen and held it out. "You're all over social media right now." Marcus frowned. "What?" Jalen swiped to a video. The grainy black and white footage from the park camera filled the screen, the real suspect tagging the wall, the timestamp, the empty path afterward. The caption read, "They tried to pin this on a kid just walking home." Marcus's breath caught. "How?" "Somebody in the station leaked it," Rico said. "Or maybe the younger cop you were with." "Doesn't matter, it's out there now." Linda glanced over his shoulder at the phone. This could change everything. By the time Marcus got home, the video had already been shared hundreds of times. Local community pages lit up with comments, some expressing outrage, others defending Blake. One post had screenshots of Marcus being led through the park, compared side by side with the actual vandal from the footage. The difference was obvious. Marcus's mom, Denise, sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, tears in her eyes but a fear set to her jaw. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she said, pulling him into a hug. "I never should have let you walk home alone tonight. It's not your fault," Marcus murmured. But his chest tightened at the thought that maybe she'd always worry now. Denise turned the laptop toward him. "People are calling for an investigation. The mayor's office is getting tagged in every post." Marcus scrolled through the comments, seeing names he recognized: teachers, neighbors, even Mrs. Delgado, who had closed her door earlier that night. She wrote, "I saw the officer with Marcus. I regret not stepping in. We can't stay silent." Linda leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "The more people see this, the harder it'll be for them to bury it." But Marcus noticed something else. Mixed among the supportive messages were a handful defending Blake, claiming the footage didn't tell the whole story, or suggesting Marcus had probably done something to get stopped. He pushed the laptop away. "Doesn't matter what the truth is for some people." Denise reached for his hand. "It matters for enough people. And now they're watching." Later that night, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust." There was no name attached, but Marcus didn't need one to know where it came from. The truth was out, but in Shillington, that didn't always mean the danger was gone. 2 days later, Shillington felt like a town holding its breath. The park footage had gone from a local talking point to a small storm that spilled into regional news. Reporters with camera crews had been spotted along Lancaster Avenue, interviewing residents about the incident. The mayor's office released a carefully worded statement about reviewing protocol and ensuring transparency, but no one mentioned Blake by name. Marcus hadn't left the house much, except to walk to the grocery store with his mom. Even that short trip had been tense. Half the people they passed offered quiet words of support, while the other half looked away or stared just long enough to send a different kind of message. That afternoon, Denise asked Marcus to carry a box of canned goods to the church food drive. The event was held in the Fellowship Hall at the corner of Brobst and Lancaster, just across from the station. Marcus almost said no, but the thought of hiding forever felt worse. When he arrived, the hall was full of neighbors. The smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air. Folding tables held stacks of donated clothes, pantry staples, and handwritten signs thanking contributors. Marcus was setting the box down when the low hum of conversation around him abruptly shifted. He turned and there was Officer Blake. Blake stood near the entrance, not in uniform this time, but in a dark jacket and jeans. Even without the badge visible, the authority clung to him like a shadow. Conversations in his vicinity grew quieter, people stepping aside without being asked. Marcus's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. If Blake had come here to rattle him, Marcus refused to give him the satisfaction of leaving. Their eyes met across the room. Blake's expression was unreadable, a mask carved from stone. He began walking toward Marcus, each step slow, deliberate. Linda wasn't here. His mom wasn't here. Just Marcus, a crowd of neighbors, and the man who had nearly destroyed his life 2 nights ago. When Blake stopped in front of him, the space between them was thick with unspoken history. "Marcus," he said evenly. "Officer Blake," Marcus replied, his tone just as steady. A muscle in Blake's jaw twitched. "You've been busy." "Not as busy as you," Marcus said, trying to explain why the wrong person was in that interrogation room. A few people nearby paused their sorting of clothes, their ears clearly tuned to the conversation. Blake's eyes flicked toward them before settling back on Marcus. "You think the world's as simple as one video, but videos don't show everything. They don't show attitude. They don't show when someone's hiding something." Marcus stepped closer, closing the gap. "They show enough. Enough to prove I didn't do what you said I did." Blake's gaze hardened, but his voice stayed low. "Watch yourself, son. Public opinion shifts fast, and friends disappear when the noise dies down." "You mean like yours?" Marcus asked, letting the words hang in the air. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Blake leaned in just slightly, his voice a whisper meant only for Marcus. "You got lucky. That's all this was. Don't push it." He straightened, gave a curt nod, and walked away, slipping out of the hall without another word. The hum of conversation returned, but it felt different, more brittle. People exchanged glances, murmured quietly, some looking at Marcus with pride, others with pity. Marcus knew then that Blake hadn't come to apologize. He'd come to remind Marcus that even when the truth is on your side, power doesn't just let go. The confrontation at the church replayed in Marcus's head all night. Every word, every look, every calculated pause from Blake felt like it had been designed to keep him in his place. By morning, he was done feeling cornered. When Marcus came downstairs for breakfast, Denise was already at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. "I've been thinking," she said, sliding it toward him. On the screen was a message thread from Mrs. Delgado, the neighbor who had watched from her porch that night. "I should have said something then. I'm ready to speak now." Mrs. Delgado had also attached a short video clip, grainy, but clear enough from her doorbell camera. It showed Marcus walking home, grocery bag in hand, long before the vandalism happened. And right behind him, it showed Blake appearing from the opposite direction, already following. Marcus stared at the screen. "This changes everything." Denise's eyes burned with determination. "Then we use it. We don't wait for them to do the right thing." That afternoon, Marcus, his mother, and Linda met in the small office of a local community activist named Carla Hughes. Carla had been posting about Marcus's case since the footage first hit social media, and now her desk was buried in letters of support, petitions, and printouts of online posts. Carla leaned forward, hands clasped. "If we release this, it's going to put more pressure on the department than they've felt in years. But Marcus, it's also going to make you more of a target." "I'm already a target," Marcus said. "The difference is now people will see it." Linda looked at him carefully. "This will force a public response. It could lead to an investigation, maybe even disciplinary action against Blake. But it could also bring harassment, threats, things you and your family need to be ready for." Marcus thought of the anonymous text he'd received, the cold, watchful tone of Blake's voice at the church, the way some people in town still looked at him, even now that the truth was clear. He took a deep breath. "I'm ready." That night, Carla posted the doorbell footage alongside the park video, with the caption, "Not only was Marcus innocent, he was followed." This was no mistake. This was targeting. Within hours, the clip exploded online. News outlets called it disturbing and clear evidence of misconduct. Civil rights groups began tagging the Shillington Police Department in demands for action. And then, a reporter from a major network announced they were coming to town to cover the story. But the reaction wasn't just online. The next morning, Marcus woke to find a note taped to their front door. No name, no signature, just the words, "Keep pushing and you'll regret it." He showed it to his mother. Her hands trembled as she held it, but her voice was steady. "We're not backing down." That evening, Carla called. "The department is holding a public forum tomorrow night. They're inviting residents to speak." Marcus knew instantly that Blake would be there. And for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to avoid him. "I'm going," Marcus said. "And I'm not staying quiet." The town hall was already overflowing by the time Marcus and his mother arrived. The old municipal building, with its creaking wooden floors and high, echoing ceilings, hadn't seen a crowd this large in years. Folding chairs filled every available space, and those without seats stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. At the front of the room, a long table faced the crowd. Behind it sat the police chief, 2 council members, and Officer Blake. Blake wore his uniform tonight, every button fastened, badge polished to a gleam. His face was a mask, neutral, unreadable, but his eyes, when they briefly flicked toward Marcus, carried the same warning they had at the church. The chief called the meeting to order, outlining that the purpose was to hear community concerns and clarify misinformation. But from the restless energy in the room, it was clear the crowd had come for more than polite conversation. Names were called from a sign-up sheet. One by one, residents stepped to the microphone. Mrs. Delgado went first, her voice shaking as she admitted she had stayed silent the night of Marcus's detention. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said, looking directly at Marcus. I'm sorry. Others followed. Mer. Patel from the deli, Kayla from the bike rack, even the man who'd recorded from his car. Each account chipped away at the official narrative until it was little more than dust. Then Marcus's name was called. The room quieted as he walked to the microphone. His mother watched from the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He took a deep breath. 2 nights ago, I was stopped by Officer Blake. I was accused of a crime I didn't commit. I was followed, questioned without my mother present, and held even after evidence proved my innocence. That's not policing. That's targeting. A murmur ran through the crowd. Blake's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. I've heard people say I was lucky there were cameras. But luck shouldn't be the difference between freedom and a record that could ruin your life. Cameras didn't save me, they just proved the truth. The problem is that without them, my word wouldn't have been enough. And that's the real issue here. He let his gaze sweep the room. This isn't just about me. If it can happen to me, an honor student, an athlete, someone with no record, it can happen to anyone. And if we don't hold people accountable when they abuse their power, it will keep happening. The crowd erupted into applause, some people standing, others calling out in agreement. The chief tapped his microphone, trying to restore order. Officer Blake, do you wish to respond? Blake leaned toward his microphone, his voice smooth. My actions that night were based on the information I had at the time. I acted in good faith, with the goal of protecting this community. A voice from the crowd shouted, protecting who? More voices joined in, challenging his words. The chief raised his hand for silence, but the tension was already boiling over. In the end, the council announced that an internal review would be conducted. There was no suspension, no public apology, no guarantee of real consequences. As the meeting broke up, people crowded around Marcus, shaking his hand, thanking him for speaking. But he could still feel Blake's stare following him through the room, a silent reminder that justice in Shillington wasn't a straight line. That night, as Marcus sat in his room, he thought about the cameras, the witnesses, the voices that had finally spoken. And he thought about all the times stories like his never made it this far. Maybe he'd won something. Or maybe the system had just allowed him this small victory to keep the peace. Either way, he knew this. The truth was out now. And it wasn't going back in the dark.